Hey there. Welcome to this episode of the Cutting Room Floor. This is an online segment where I take us a little bit deeper into a passage of scripture or part of the message that we just couldn't get to in the course of a message. Maybe because it's not the main focus point of a text, but it's still something interesting and something relevant. And so we get to just chase a little rabbit trail and go into something. A part of a text that maybe we just didn't get to. Not long ago, we looked at 1 Corinthians chapter 10. And in 1 Corinthians 10, Paul is writing to the Corinthians, and he's really encouraging the Corinthians to pay attention to the lessons from the past, to look at Israelite history as a sort of warning for their own situation. And so what Paul does is he refers to a number of these Old Testament stories that are part of Israel's history, and he reminds them of the lessons that they should learn from each of those different stories. Now, in 1 Corinthians chapter 10, verse 4, one of the stories that Paul reminds them of is how the Israelites, he says, they drank from the same spiritual rock that followed them, and that rock was Christ. Now, if you really stop and think about it, that's an unusual claim for Paul to make. He is saying that the rock in the wilderness was Christ himself, and that sort of raises a question, which is, how is it that Christ was present in the wilderness? How can Paul say that Christ was there in the desert some 1,500, 1,200 years before Jesus was actually born? And that's the question. I want to kind of dig into that a little bit with you. Paul is referencing an event. There are actually two events in Old Testament history that have to do with Moses striking a rock and providing spiritual or providing water for the people. One of those examples is a negative example, and one of them is a positive example or a positive experience. And it's the positive experience that I think Paul is referring to here. It's in Exodus chapter 17. And in Exodus chapter 17, the Jewish people in the wilderness are grumbling. They're complaining that God is not providing for them, that God is not taking care of the people while they're there in the wilderness. And so God does actually something rather unusual. He tells Moses that God, will stand on Mount Horeb, and that Moses is then to strike that rock of Mount Horeb. And so that's what happens. And then it's out of that rock of Mount Horeb that God provides this water for his people. Now, what I think you have to understand is really going on there. There's some significant things. Number one, Moses is not striking a rock, not exactly. What Moses is actually doing is he is striking the place where God is. So it's crucial to that passage that God says, "I will stand on that rock." Now, what is that rock? What is the rock that God is standing on? Well, it's Mount Horeb. Now, you might say, well, what is Mount Horeb? Where is that? What significance is that? Mount Horeb was the place where God gave the law to the Israelite people. It was sort of, you could think of it a little bit like a law court. That's where God's law was administered before his people. And so when God is taking his place on Mount Horeb, what he's essentially doing is he's taking his place in the prisoner's dock, as it were. He's putting himself in the courtroom, in the place of the accused, in the place of the guilty, and he is then offering himself to bear the penalty, or to bear the punishment and the judgment for the people's failure to keep the law. So just imagine this picture before the Israelites. This is the picture that is so powerful. God himself stands in the place of the condemned one. He stands in the place of judgment, and he tells Moses that you are to strike me. right? God actually requests that Moses strike him with the rod of justice. Even though God is not the guilty one, even though God is not the one who actually has committed any crime or broken any law, God is the one who stands there in front of the people in the place of the condemned. And he is the one who bears the judgment, the penalty. And in that sense, then what God does is out of that rock, then God provides living water for his people. So it's a powerful picture. God is the way that God will provide living water for his people is by himself taking his spot in the place of the condemned and bearing the judgment that should fall on his people so that he might then provide springs of living water. So God is portraying a reality, a picture for his people. And that reality, of course, is meant to point us to the greater reality of Christ. How is it that God provides living water for you and for me? How is it that God quenches our deepest thirst? Well, in very much the same way that he did for the Israelites. He takes his place in the spot of the condemned, and he is struck on the cross, and out of his pierced side, water literally flows, and of course, metaphorically, out of Christ, the living water of the Spirit flows to us. And so, in that sense, Christ was very much present in the wilderness because Christ was being portrayed. His work and his mission and his purpose was being enacted in front of the people. He was being portrayed as the one who would be broken and struck in the place of justice so that we might receive the living waters. Hey, thanks for watching. As always, don't forget to like and subscribe and leave a comment. Let us know what you think, and we'll see you next time.